The Forbidden Chamber. John Carter moved like a shadow through the grand palace halls, his boots barely making a sound on the polished silver floors. The alien empire's royal palace was a fortress, protected by energy shields, biometric scanners, and elite guards, but he had managed to slip inside unnoticed. His mission was simple: gather intelligence and get out. But as he moved deeper into the palace, a strange feeling crept over him. Something was wrong. He had studied the palace blueprints before coming in. There was one place that no one was allowed to enter, a chamber deep in the heart of the palace. The Forbidden Chamber. It was strictly off-limits, even to the royal court. So why was the door left slightly open? John hesitated for only a second. His instincts screamed at him to turn back, but curiosity, and maybe a little recklessness, pushed him forward. He took a deep breath and stepped inside. Inside the Forbidden Chamber, the room was nothing like the rest of the palace, where the outer halls were filled with gold and jewels. This chamber was simple, dark, and quiet. The air was thick, almost humming with a strange energy. Large pillars surrounded the center of the room, casting long shadows across the floor. And in the middle of it all, she stood there. John froze. He had expected guards, traps, or maybe some ancient artifact. He had not expected to find the princess of the Galactic Empire herself, Serafina. She was nothing like the reports described. She wasn't dressed in grand robes, nor was she surrounded by servants. Instead, she stood alone, dressed in a simple silk outfit, her long silver hair flowing down her back. Her glowing violet eyes locked onto his, filled not with anger, but with something else, something unreadable. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then her lips parted. "You should not be here," she whispered. John's pulse raced. Every instinct told him to run. But something about her calm yet piercing gaze held him in place. He took a careful step forward. Then why was the door open? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, as if studying him, as if trying to understand something about him that even he didn't know. Then she said something that sent a chill down his spine. "Because I was waiting for you." A dangerous secret. John's hand instinctively went to the small pulse pistol strapped to his side. This had to be a trick, a trap. "Waiting for me?" he asked carefully. "You don't even know who I am." Her lips curved into the faintest of smiles. "Don't I?" She took a step forward, and for the first time, John noticed something strange about the floor beneath them. It wasn't metal, like the rest of the palace. It was stone, ancient, cracked, covered in markings. He frowned. "These symbols," he murmured. "I've seen them before." Serafina's gaze flickered with something. Surprise? Interest. "Then you already know the truth." John shook his head. "No, I don't. But I have a feeling I'm about to find out." Serafina glanced toward the chamber door, then back at John. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "If the Emperor finds you here, he will kill you. But if you leave now, you may never know what you were meant to learn." John had faced death before. He had fought in wars, survived impossible missions. But somehow, this moment felt more dangerous than all of them combined. Still, he had come this far. He wasn't about to walk away now. "Then tell me," he said, "what is this place? And why were you waiting for me?" Serafina exhaled slowly. "Because," she said, "the future of the galaxy depends on what happens next." The alarm blares. Before John could respond, the silence was shattered by a deafening alarm. The chamber door slammed shut, locking them inside. Red warning lights flashed across the ceiling. John immediately pulled out his pistol, scanning the room for threats. What the hell was that? Serafina remained calm, but her eyes darkened. "They've detected you." John cursed under his breath. He had been so careful. How had they found him? He turned back to Serafina. "We need to move. Now." She nodded, but instead of heading for an exit, she moved toward the center of the chamber, toward a circular platform embedded in the stone floor. John hesitated. "What are you doing?" She looked at him, her expression serious. "Giving you a choice." John narrowed his eyes. "A choice?" Serafina placed a hand on the platform. Instantly, the symbols on the floor began to glow, a soft blue light pulsing beneath them. "You can run," she said. "Escape while you still can." Or, the door behind them shook violently. Guards were outside, trying to break in. Serafina's voice was calm but firm. "Or you can stay and learn the truth." John tightened his grip on his weapon. His mind raced. If he stayed, he would be trapped. If he ran, he might never get another chance to uncover what was really happening inside this palace. The door cracked open, guards ready to storm in. John looked at Serafina, looked at the glowing symbols. He made his decision. "I'm staying." Serafina nodded, pressing her hand against the platform. The glow intensified, and just as the guards burst in, everything vanished into darkness. The secret beneath the palace. Darkness swallowed John Carter whole. 1 second, he had been standing inside the forbidden chamber, alarms blaring, guards storming in. Then everything vanished. The floor beneath his feet was gone. The air around him felt thick, weightless, unnatural. He wasn't falling. He wasn't floating. He was somewhere else. Then, light exploded all around him. John gasped as his feet hit solid ground. He stumbled slightly, raising his weapon, scanning his surroundings. He was no longer in the grand golden palace. The air was cooler. The walls were ancient, carved from stone, instead of the polished metal of the empire above. Strange glowing runes shimmered along the walls, casting an eerie blue light over everything. A sudden voice cut through the silence. "Breathe, human. You're safe. For now." John whirled around. Serafina stood a few feet away, completely at ease, her violet eyes glowing softly in the dim light. Her silver hair caught the strange blue glow, making her look almost ethereal. Unlike him, she seemed completely unsurprised by what had just happened. John narrowed his eyes. What the hell just happened? Serafina took a step forward, her expression unreadable. "We stepped outside the reach of the Emperor. We are now beneath the palace." John's grip on his weapon tightened. He didn't trust this. Didn't trust her. "I studied the palace blueprints," he said slowly. "There's no underground section." Serafina's lips curved slightly. "Because it was erased from history long before your people ever took to the stars." John frowned. "Erased." Serafina turned, gesturing for him to follow. "Come. There isn't much time." For a second, John hesitated. Following an alien princess into an unknown underground ruin wasn't exactly in his mission plan. But something about this place, about her, felt important. Against his better judgment, he followed. The forgotten past. The corridors stretched long and narrow, the walls carved with symbols that felt older than the empire itself. John ran his fingers across one of the symbols, frowning. He had seen similar markings before, in ruins on dead planets, in forgotten tombs across the galaxy. These weren't just decorative carvings. They were warnings. Serafina glanced back at him. "You recognize them, don't you?" John met her gaze. "Yeah, but that doesn't make sense. These markings predate your empire by 10,000 years. John stopped. She turned to face him fully, her expression unreadable. "This empire wasn't built from nothing, John Carter. It was built on the ashes of something far older." John exhaled slowly. "You're saying the emperor isn't the first ruler of this place?" Serafina shook her head. "No, he was never meant to be a ruler at all." John felt the weight of her words. He had studied the history of this empire before taking the mission. It was the largest ruling force in the known galaxy. Powerful, unchallenged, ancient. The emperor was said to be its eternal ruler, an immortal being who had led the empire since its inception. But if what Serafina was saying was true, John's gut twisted. then who ruled before him? Seraphina's eyes darkened. My ancestors. Silence. John's mind raced. That didn't make sense. The emperor had always been the supreme authority. No records of a royal family ever existed. If Seraphina was telling the truth, it meant the entire history of the empire was a lie. John exhaled sharply. What happened to them? Seraphina hesitated. Then she stepped forward, pressing her palm against the nearest wall. The runes beneath her fingers flared brighter, and suddenly, the walls moved. Stone shifted, grinding against itself as the corridor widened into a massive underground chamber. John's breath caught. Towering statues stood in a perfect circle, each depicting a different alien figure. Some looked like Seraphina, tall, elegant, regal. But others were strange, monstrous, humanoid, and yet not. And in the center of them all, carved into the very ground, was a single symbol. John stepped closer, his pulse quickening. That symbol. Seraphina nodded. It's the mark of the first sovereigns, the true rulers of this empire. John knelt beside the carving, tracing its edges. The design was simple, a circle split by a jagged crack, but something about it felt deeply unsettling. Then he noticed something else. A name was etched beneath the mark, a name written in a language lost to time, but one John somehow understood. He whispered it aloud. Exiled one. Seraphina's voice was soft. My father. John's stomach dropped. The emperor, he murmured. He wasn't the rightful ruler. He was a traitor. Seraphina nodded. He overthrew the first sovereigns, wiped their existence from history, and crowned himself eternal king. But he wasn't satisfied with that. He feared that one day, the truth would come to light. So he hunted the last surviving heir. She looked at John, her gaze steady. Me. John let out a slow breath, realization crashing over him. That's why you were waiting for me, he said. Because I wasn't supposed to find this place. You were. Seraphina nodded. John shook his head, processing. Why not just tell the truth? Reveal the history. Her expression turned grim. Because he erased the bloodline. There's no record of my family. To the empire, I am just a daughter, a symbol, a pawn. She exhaled. If I were to claim my true right, he would destroy me. John looked at her for a long moment. Seraphina had grown up in the heart of the empire, raised under the shadow of a tyrant, carrying the weight of a lost legacy. Yet despite everything, she still stood here, alive, fighting, ready. He admired that. Then he turned back to the statues, to the ancient carvings. His military instincts kicked in. If the emperor ever finds out you've been down here, he already knows. John's blood ran cold. Before he could react, a deep rumbling shook the chamber. The walls trembled. The ground beneath them cracked. Seraphina's eyes widened. We have to go. Now. John jumped to his feet. What the hell is happening? Seraphina grabbed his wrist, pulling him toward an archway. He's sealing the chamber. John cursed under his breath. The emperor must have sensed their presence here, or worse, had been waiting for them. The statues began crumbling, ancient dust filling the air. The glowing runes flickered violently, as if something was trying to erase this place from existence once and for all. John sprinted after Seraphina, dodging falling debris. They reached the archway just as the ceiling caved in behind them, burying thousands of years of history beneath rubble. John turned, chest heaving, as the chamber disappeared forever. Seraphina stood beside him, fists clenched. He's trying to bury the past, she said. But it's too late. John took one last look at the now sealed ruins. Then he turned to Seraphina. Looks like you just started a war, princess. Her violet eyes met his. No, she said. We just found the weapon to win it. The emperor's shadow looms. A low, ominous rumble echoed through the tunnels as John Carter and Seraphina sprinted through the collapsing underground passage. Dust and debris rained down, coating their skin and clothes. The air was thick, almost suffocating, as centuries of history were being buried behind them. John stole a quick glance at Serafina. Her face was tense, but her eyes burned with determination. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about reclaiming the truth her father had erased. A loud crack sounded above, and John barely had time to shove Serafina aside as a massive stone pillar came crashing down where she had been standing a second ago. She let out a sharp breath, her fingers tightening around John's wrist. "We can't stop. The Emperor is sealing every exit." John cursed. "You're telling me this entire place is rigged to collapse?" Serafina nodded. "It was meant to be my tomb." John gritted his teeth and pushed forward, his mind racing. He had been on plenty of dangerous missions before: black ops, high-risk infiltration, deep space warfare, but nothing quite like this. The enemy wasn't just an empire. It was a living history of lies collapsing around them. Then, up ahead, he saw it, an archway leading into another chamber. He didn't hesitate. Grabbing Serafina's hand, he lunged forward, just as the ceiling behind them caved in completely. The dust settled, and for a long moment, all was silent. They had made it. The hidden vault. John bent over, catching his breath. His body ached, his lungs burned, but at least they were alive. He looked around, taking in their new surroundings. This chamber was different. Unlike the ruins they had just escaped, this place felt preserved. The walls were smooth, shimmering with a faint blue glow. Strange floating artifacts hovered above stone pedestals, casting soft, rippling shadows. At the far end of the room stood a massive metal door, covered in intricate carvings and symbols. Serafina exhaled sharply. "We made it." John raised an eyebrow. "You know where we are?" She nodded slowly. "This is the vault of the first sovereigns." John frowned, scanning the room. "The what?" Serafina stepped forward, brushing her fingers over one of the hovering artifacts. It pulsed in response, sending waves of golden light rippling across the chamber. "This is the last remaining sanctuary of my ancestors," she said, "before the Emperor took the throne, before he erased their existence. This was where the first sovereigns stored their most dangerous secrets." John didn't like the sound of that. Define dangerous. Serafina turned to face him, her eyes gleaming. "Weapons, technology, knowledge of an empire greater than any that exists today." John whistled low. "So, you're telling me the Emperor's biggest secret is that he's sitting on top of a civilization's lost arsenal?" Serafina gave a small nod. "And we are standing inside it." John exhaled. This was bigger than he had imagined. The Emperor's power had always seemed absolute, but if his rule was built on stolen technology from an erased civilization, then maybe he wasn't as invincible as the galaxy believed. The Emperor's trap. John was about to ask more when suddenly the vault door groaned. A deep metallic grinding sound filled the chamber as the door began to unlock on its own. John instantly drew his weapon, heart pounding. "That's not normal, is it?" Serafina took a slow step back. "No, someone is overriding the security system." Then, a voice boomed through the chamber. "You are trespassing in a place that does not belong to you." John's breath hitched. The voice wasn't coming from a speaker. It was inside the chamber itself. Serafina's expression turned ice cold. "It's him." John clenched his jaw. "The Emperor?" Serafina nodded grimly. "He must have anticipated this. He knew I would come here one day." John felt his adrenaline spike. "And you didn't think to mention that before we got here." The vault door slammed open. John barely had time to process what was happening before a group of towering figures stepped through. They weren't just ordinary soldiers. They were Imperial Sentinels, elite bio-enhanced warriors, built for war, armed with energy blades and plasma rifles. John's instincts kicked in instantly. "Cover," he shouted, diving behind one of the floating pedestals as a plasma bolt shot past his head. Serafina moved like lightning, flipping over a pillar and landing behind cover beside him. "There are too many," she hissed. John peeked around the corner. 5 sentinels, highly trained, highly deadly, and blocking their only exit. His mind raced. He had faced worse. He had survived worse. But this was about to get ugly. The fight for survival. The first sentinel charged. John barely had time to react before the warrior was on him, swinging a glowing energy blade toward his throat. John ducked, rolling backward just as the blade sliced through the pedestal behind him, cutting it in half. Sparks and golden light exploded in the air. Serafina moved fast, using the distraction to grab a floating spear-like artifact from another pedestal. With one swift motion, she activated it. The weapon instantly extended, crackling with energy. She spun and drove it into the nearest sentinel's chest. The warrior stumbled back, blue sparks rippling across his armor. John took the opportunity to raise his pistol and fire. A single shot, straight through the sentinel's exposed throat. The warrior dropped, motionless. John barely had time to celebrate before another enemy was on him. He ducked as a blade swung past his face, narrowly missing him. He countered, grabbing the sentinel's wrist, twisting it sharply until he heard a sickening crack. The warrior roared in pain, but John didn't give him time to recover. He grabbed the fallen blade and drove it straight into the sentinel's chest. 2 down, 3 to go. Serafina was holding her own, spinning, dodging, using the ancient energy spear with a skill that left John momentarily stunned. She fought like someone trained for war. But the sentinels weren't giving up. One of them raised his wrist, and John saw it too late. A blast of pure energy shot toward Serafina. Serafina. She turned at the last second, but it was too late. The blast hit her square in the chest, sending her flying backward into the stone wall. John's blood turned to ice. He snapped. His instincts overrode his fear, his hesitation, everything. In a blur of movement, he sprinted forward, grabbing another fallen weapon from the ground, and plunged it into the next sentinel's gut. 1 left. The final warrior turned to him, raising his rifle. John pulled the trigger first. A single shot, straight through the head. The last sentinel collapsed. Silence. John turned, heart hammering. Serafina was still on the ground, motionless. His chest tightened. "Serafina." She groaned. Slowly, she opened her eyes. John exhaled sharply, relief flooding him. He reached down, offering her his hand. "Come on, princess. We're not dying today." Serafina grasped his hand, pulling herself up. She looked at the open vault, at the ancient weapons waiting inside. Then she turned to John. "Let's finish this." The arsenal of the first sovereigns. The heavy silence in the vault was deceptive. A momentary pause before the storm. John Carter wiped a streak of blood from his cheek, stepping over the fallen sentinels. Their biomechanical armor still crackled with dying energy, the blue glow flickering like embers before vanishing completely. The fight had been brutal, fast, and far too close. Serafina staggered to her feet, gripping her ribs. John caught her before she collapsed again. "Hey, easy," he muttered. "You took a direct hit." "I'm fine," she said through gritted teeth, though her face was pale. John didn't believe that for a second. She glanced at the bodies of the fallen sentinels, then at the wide-open vault of the first sovereigns. The doors had unlocked in the chaos, revealing a chamber unlike anything John had ever seen before. It was massive, stretching endlessly into the darkness, filled with floating relics, advanced weaponry, and technology lost to time. The air itself seemed charged with energy, an ancient power humming beneath their feet. John let out a low whistle. "Well, princess," he said, glancing at Serafina, "looks like we just walked into the Emperor's worst nightmare." Serafina didn't respond immediately. Her violet eyes were locked onto the grand chamber, her expression unreadable. John watched her carefully. There was something in her gaze, something beyond just determination. a flicker of hesitation. "You okay?" he asked. Serafina inhaled slowly, then met his gaze. "My people once ruled from this place," she whispered. "This was my birthright." John glanced at the massive statues lining the walls, figures of the ancient rulers, carved from obsidian and gold. He could see the resemblance between them and Serafina, but that didn't explain the hesitation in her voice. "You don't sound happy about it," he said. Serafina shook her head. "Because now I understand why my father was so afraid of this place." John frowned. "Afraid?" She turned to him. "Because inside this vault lies the power to destroy him. The ultimate weapon." John followed Serafina as she walked deeper into the vault, past shimmering artifacts and towering weapon racks. Some of the weapons looked familiar: energy rifles, plasma sabers, rail cannons. But others were something else entirely. Floating metal spheres hummed with a strange blue aura. Gigantic mechanized suits lined the far walls, their dark plating inscribed with glowing alien runes. A single silver gauntlet hovered in a containment field, sparks of energy dancing around it. "This isn't just a weapons vault," John muttered. "This is an armory for gods." Serafina stopped in front of a pedestal at the heart of the chamber. Unlike the others, this one was empty. John raised an eyebrow. "Okay, I'm guessing whatever was here was pretty important." Serafina exhaled. "More than important." She turned to face him. It was the Sovereign's core, a relic of immeasurable power, a weapon that could wipe entire fleets from existence, and my father stole it. John cursed under his breath. "Let me guess, he's using it as the ultimate failsafe." Serafina nodded grimly. "If we confront him, he'll use it without hesitation." John ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. The Emperor had always been dangerous, but now he had a planet killer in his hands. "We need to find it before he does," John said. Serafina hesitated. John caught the flicker of doubt in her expression again. "What is it?" She looked away. "The core can only be controlled by someone with the bloodline of the sovereigns." John's stomach dropped. "You mean?" Serafina met his gaze. "If we find it, I will have to use it. And if I do, there's no going back." John understood what she meant. If she wielded that kind of power, she would no longer be a runaway princess. She would be the rightful ruler. The rebellion wouldn't just be against the Emperor anymore. It would be a war of succession. "You don't have to do this alone," he said. Serafina studied him for a long moment. Then she gave a small smile. "I was hoping you'd say that." Before John could respond, the entire vault trembled. The Emperor's arrival. A low mechanical hum filled the air, followed by a voice that sent a chill down John's spine. "You should have stayed in exile, my dear daughter." John's blood ran cold. The Emperor's voice. Serafina's hands clenched into fists. "He's here." John spun around, raising his weapon just as the far wall of the vault began to shift. A massive golden door slid open, revealing the dark corridor beyond. And then, a shadow stepped through. John had seen countless tyrants, warlords, and emperors in his lifetime, but none of them compared to this. The Emperor of the Galactic Empire was not human, nor was he fully alien. He was something in between, a towering figure draped in black ceremonial armor, his face hidden behind a mask of gold and crimson. Two burning red eyes gleamed from within the mask. But it wasn't just his appearance that made John's skin crawl. It was the pressure in the air, the sheer weight of his presence. Serafina stepped forward, her voice cold. "Father." The Emperor tilted his head slightly. "Daughter." John tightened his grip on his gun. "So what's the plan here, Your Majesty? You gonna give us a dramatic speech before trying to kill us?" The Emperor chuckled. "No, human. I am simply going to kill you first. Without warning." The Emperor raised his hand. The air rippled, and suddenly, a shockwave slammed into John, sending him flying across the room. He hit the ground hard, his body skidding across the smooth stone floor. Pain exploded in his ribs. John barely had time to react before he saw it. The Emperor was no longer in front of Serafina. He had moved, faster than anything John had ever seen. In the blink of an eye, the Emperor was standing behind Serafina, his clawed hand reaching for her throat. John's vision blurred with adrenaline. He had 1 second, one shot. He didn't think. He acted. John grabbed the nearest weapon off the ground, a strange ancient pistol-like artifact, and pulled the trigger. A blast of energy shot through the air, hitting the Emperor square in the chest. The impact sent the tyrant staggering backward, not injured, but surprised. John rolled to his feet, panting. The Emperor turned his gaze to him, and for the first time, John saw something in those glowing red eyes. Curiosity. "You," the Emperor whispered, "you should not exist." John gritted his teeth. "Yeah, well, I get that a lot." Serafina grabbed John's arm. "We need to leave. Now." John glanced at the weapons, the vault, the knowledge they had uncovered. Then he looked at the Emperor, standing tall and unshaken. They weren't ready for this fight. Not yet. "Agreed," John muttered. "Time to run." Serafina raised her hand, activating a hidden control panel. And just like that, the vault vanished in a blinding flash of light. The Emperor's hunt begins. Light exploded in every direction. For a split second, John Carter felt like he was being ripped apart and stitched back together at the same time. His vision twisted, colors swirling into an impossible vortex of blue and white. His stomach lurched as his body was yanked through space itself. Then, impact. John hit the ground hard, rolling across smooth metal before slamming into a cold surface. The breath was knocked out of his lungs, and for a moment, he just lay there, gasping, his head spinning. A low groan sounded nearby. John forced his eyes open. Serafina was sprawled on the floor next to him, her silver hair tangled, her body trembling from the violent jump. They had teleported. Somewhere. John sat up, every muscle aching. "Princess, you alive?" Serafina slowly pushed herself up, shaking her head as if clearing the dizziness. "Barely." John took a deep breath and looked around. They were inside what looked like a starship hangar, but not just any hangar. The walls were lined with ancient fighter ships, sleek and angular, covered in glowing alien runes. The air smelled of ozone and burning metal, like the place hadn't been used in centuries. Serafina recognized it immediately. "This is an escape bunker," she murmured. "One of the last hidden sovereign strongholds." John frowned. "How did you know to teleport us here?" Serafina gave a weak smile. "I didn't. The vault had pre-programmed emergency locations. This must have been the closest one." John exhaled. "Well, lucky us." Then he froze. A warning siren blared through the bunker. A holographic AI flickered to life in front of them. A shimmering blue humanoid figure. Its voice was deep, mechanical, and urgent. "Warning. Unauthorized Imperial forces detected within 3 light years. Cloaking field has been compromised. Evacuate immediately." John's stomach dropped. Serafina's expression turned grim. "He's already hunting us." The Emperor wasn't wasting time. He had tracked them almost instantly. John stood up fast, his mind racing. "We need a ship. Now." Serafina nodded, scanning the hangar. "There. That one." John followed her gaze. In the far corner of the hangar sat a sleek black warship, smaller than a cruiser but heavily armored, with a design unlike anything in the current Imperial fleet. John grinned. "That looks promising." Serafina's eyes darkened. "It's not just any ship. It's a sovereign Dreadstrike-class fighter, designed to outrun, outgun, and outmaneuver anything the Empire has today." John's grin widened. "Then let's steal it." The Emperor's arrival. As they sprinted toward the ship, the bunker shook violently. John glanced at the ceiling. Something massive had just entered the planet's orbit. Then he saw it through the reinforced glass of the hangar doors. A colossal Imperial warship, black and gold, its engines glowing red, hovered in the sky like a predator waiting to strike. Serafina's breath caught. His flagship. John cursed. Son of a... He came himself. Serafina clenched her fists. He's making sure we don't escape this time. Then the warship's underside began to open. John's instincts screamed at him. Move. The moment they jumped into the cockpit of the sovereign ship, the hangar exploded. A massive plasma strike from the Emperor's ship obliterated the entrance, sending a shockwave of fire and debris roaring through the bunker. John barely had time to throw himself into the pilot's seat before Serafina sealed the airlock behind them. Engines online, she shouted. John flicked the ignition, and the ship roared to life, a deep, powerful hum shaking the entire cockpit. Outside, dozens of enemy fighters poured out of the Emperor's warship, heading straight for them. John gritted his teeth. Strap in, princess. Serafina grabbed the co-pilot controls as John yanked the ship into the sky. The escape battle. The moment they breached the planet's atmosphere, hell broke loose. Imperial fighters swarmed them, their sleek black hulls gleaming against the stars. Plasma bolts streaked across the void, flashing past their ship as John jerked the controls, dodging incoming fire. Serafina's fingers danced over the controls. Weapons armed. John grinned. That's what I like to hear. The Dreadstrike-class ship was faster than anything John had ever flown. The thrusters burned blue-hot, weaving between the enemy ships like a phantom. Then, Serafina fired. Twin energy cannons unleashed a storm of plasma fire, cutting through the enemy fighters like paper. Two ships erupted into fireballs, debris scattering across the battlefield. John whooped. Nice shooting. Serafina's eyes burned with focus. More incoming. John saw them. 10 fighters in formation, closing in. He gritted his teeth. All right, let's see what this thing can really do. He flipped a switch. The ship suddenly accelerated, throwing them back in their seats. A shockwave of energy blasted outward, disrupting the targeting systems of the enemy ships. In one swift motion, John spun the ship upside down, weaving between the attacking fighters before lining up a shot. Boom. 3 more enemy ships exploded in rapid succession. Serafina turned to John, slightly breathless. You've flown one of these before. John smirked. First time. But I'm a fast learner. Serafina let out a soft chuckle, the first real laugh John had heard from her. Then, the warship moved. John felt it before he even saw it, a massive buildup of energy from the Emperor's flagship. Serafina's smile vanished. He's charging the Sovereign's core. John's heart nearly stopped. Wait, you mean the thing that can destroy entire fleets? Serafina's hands trembled. If he fires that at us, we're dead. John's mind raced. They had seconds, maybe less. Then he saw something on the ship's interface. A blinking hyperspace drive activation. It wasn't fully charged, but it was their only shot. John clenched his jaw. I hope you believe in miracles, princess. Serafina's eyes widened. John, don't you dare. John slammed the hyperspace lever forward. For a second, nothing happened. Then, the stars stretched into infinity. A violent force pulled them forward, yanking the ship through the hyperspace corridor. Just as a massive beam of destruction erupted behind them, the Emperor had fired. The planet they had just escaped from was obliterated. John and Serafina had vanished into the void, but they weren't safe yet. The fall of the Emperor begins. The world reformed around John Carter in a blinding rush of light and sound. 1 second, he had been standing in the vault of the first sovereigns, staring down the Emperor himself. The next, he and Serafina had been yanked through some kind of emergency teleportation field, ripped out of the palace before the Emperor could land a killing blow. Now, they stood in complete darkness. John's boots scraped against metal plating, his lungs burning as he fought for breath. His vision was still adjusting, the transition from a palace of gold to this cold, metallic space making his head spin. A quiet hum filled the air, along with the distant sound of dripping water and mechanical groaning. He blinked. Then his eyes focused. They weren't in the palace anymore. They were inside a starship, a broken, ancient one. "Serafina," he gasped, spinning around. "You with me?" She staggered against the wall, breathing heavily. Her silver hair was disheveled, her normally regal posture shaken but unbroken. "I'm here," she murmured, pressing a hand to her ribs. The teleport was unstable. John let out a breath, scanning their surroundings. The walls were lined with alien consoles, flickering with faint blue energy. The place was massive, clearly the bridge of a long-forgotten warship. And not just any warship. John narrowed his eyes, touching the rusted insignia on the wall. It was the mark of the first sovereigns. A realization hit him like a thunderclap. This wasn't just any ship. This was a sovereign dreadnought, a relic of the past, thought to be lost in the war that erased Serafina's people from history. And somehow, it was still alive. Serafina pushed off the wall, her expression hardening as she took in their surroundings. "This is impossible. This ship shouldn't exist." John gave a half smirk. "I feel like we keep saying that a lot." She ignored him, stepping forward, running her fingers over the cold steel of the command console. "If this ship is still functional, we may have a way to strike back." John's smirk faded. Strike back? She wasn't talking about escape anymore. She was talking about war. Awakening the lost warship. The bridge was silent, save for the occasional flicker of the dying systems. Dust clung to every surface, the air heavy with centuries of abandonment. John watched as Serafina traced her fingers over a holographic control panel. "Can you power it up?" he asked. She exhaled. "Maybe." These ships were built before the Emperor's rule. He erased them from existence because he feared them. John frowned. "Then why is this one still here?" Serafina hesitated. Someone must have hidden it. That sent a chill down John's spine. Hidden? For how long? Serafina shook her head. "Long before I was born." John exhaled. This ship had been waiting for something, or someone. Serafina turned to him. "The core is still out there. If we can find it, we can fully restore this dreadnought." And a deep mechanical voice suddenly echoed through the bridge. "Unauthorized presence detected. Identify or be neutralized." John's blood froze. Serafina immediately spun toward the command console, her fingers flying over the holographic keys. "It's the ship's eye. It must still be active." John drew his weapon. "Tell it not to kill us." Serafina's eyes flickered with frustration. "That's what I'm trying to do." The voice boomed again, this time more menacing. "State your designation. This vessel is restricted to authorized sovereign personnel." John swallowed. This eye was old, but it was still dangerous. Serafina stepped forward, her posture straightening. "I am Princess Serafina of the sovereign bloodline," she declared, her voice unwavering, "and I invoke my right as heir to command this vessel." Silence. Then, processing claim. The ship shuddered. John tightened his grip on his weapon, his heart hammering. This thing could decide to vaporize them both in the next 5 seconds. Then, suddenly, the lights flared to life. Holographic displays flickered on, casting a ghostly blue glow over the bridge. The dust lifted into the air, as if the ship itself was taking a deep breath after centuries of slumber. Then the AI spoke again, this time with something different in its tone. "Designation confirmed. Welcome, Sovereign Heir. This vessel, the Obsidian Wrath, is now under your command." Serafina let out a breath. John ran a hand down his face. That was a gamble. Serafina smirked. A necessary one. John exhaled. "So, what now?" Serafina turned toward the ship's central interface, her eyes flashing with newfound determination. "Now," she said, Now we make the Emperor afraid." John let out a low whistle. This was about to get interesting. The Emperor strikes first. But before they could celebrate, a new warning alarm blared across the ship. Serafina's gaze snapped to the holographic display. "No." John immediately turned toward the main viewport. His stomach dropped. Outside the ship, through the dust-covered glass of the bridge, he saw it. A fleet. Hundreds of Imperial warships were descending toward the ruined planet below. The Emperor wasn't waiting for them to make a move. He had found them first. John cursed. How the hell did he track us? Serafina clenched her fists. He must have detected the ship's activation. The obsidian wrath was never meant to wake up again. John gritted his teeth. "Well, it's awake now." Serafina turned toward the AI. "Activate all defense systems. Prepare for battle. Asterisk asterisk." The AI's voice hummed. "Warning. This vessel has not been fully restored. Primary weapons offline. Hull integrity at 42%. John groaned. "That's a problem." Serafina didn't hesitate. "We just need enough power to break through their blockade and escape. Then we find the core." John exhaled, gripping the railing. "Guess we're doing this." Serafina turned toward him, her eyes fierce. "Are you with me, John Carter?" John smirked, checking his weapon. "Princess," he said, "I didn't come this far just to run away." Serafina gave a rare smile. Then, together, they turned toward the command console and prepared for war. The war for the sovereign throne. The obsidian wrath roared to life. Deep inside the lost warship, ancient systems hummed with power, long-dormant weapons awakening from their centuries-long slumber. The ship's hull trembled, its fractured energy core struggling to hold itself together. John Carter stood at the bridge, gripping the metal railing, his heart hammering. Outside, through the massive panoramic viewport, the Emperor's fleet had arrived. Hundreds of Imperial warships had dropped out of warp, their sleek black hulls reflecting the pale light of the dying star above. Dreadnoughts, battleships, fighter squadrons, an entire armada. It was an execution force. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to erase history. John's throat went dry. "So, this is bad, right?" Serafina's violet eyes darkened as she studied the enemy fleet. "This is worse than bad," she murmured. "This is genocide." John exhaled. Of course, the Emperor wouldn't just let them escape. He had spent centuries erasing the history of the sovereigns, ensuring that no one would ever learn the truth. Now, with the obsidian wrath awakened, he wasn't taking any chances. He wanted them dead. John turned toward Serafina. "Tell me you have a plan." She took a deep breath. "We need to break through their blockade and make the jump to hyperspace. Once we escape, we can find the core." John gave a grim chuckle. "Right. Just casually outrun an entire empire's fleet in a half-broken warship." Serafina smirked. "That's the spirit." The AI's voice suddenly boomed across the bridge. Enemy vessels locking weapons. Incoming fire detected. John's instincts screamed. "Brace." Outside, the first wave of enemy torpedoes was already closing in. The war had begun. Hellfire in the void. The first torpedoes slammed into the warship's shields. The impact sent a shockwave through the hull, and John stumbled, barely catching himself on the console. "Shields at 32%, the AI warned. John cursed. That was just the first volley. Serafina's hands flew across the control panel, activating countermeasures. The ship shuddered as ancient autonomous defense drones detached from the hull, flaring to life. They immediately sprayed rapid plasma fire, intercepting some of the incoming missiles, but there were too many. Another blast shook the ship. Sparks flew from the overhead panels. John gritted his teeth. "We need to hit back." Serafina slammed a fist against the command console. "The main weapons aren't fully operational. The ship isn't at full power yet." John's mind raced. The Obsidian Wrath had once been one of the most powerful warships in the galaxy. If it was fully restored, It could probably wipe out the Emperor's fleet in minutes. But right now, it was barely holding together. John clenched his fists. They needed time. He turned toward Serafina. How long until we can jump to hyperspace? Serafina checked the calculations. 4 minutes. John's jaw tightened. That was an eternity in battle. A new alarm blared. Enemy boarding craft detected. John froze. Wait. Boarding craft. Serafina's eyes widened. He's not just trying to destroy us. He wants to take the ship. John spun toward the viewport and saw them. Dozens of black, spider-like boarding ships were detaching from the enemy fleet, racing toward them like predatory beasts. The Emperor wasn't just here to kill them. He wanted the ship, and if they let him get it, the war would be over before it even began. John took a deep breath. Then he pulled out his gun. "Serafina," he said, "get us to hyperspace. I'll handle the boarders." She turned sharply. "John, you can't fight them alone." John flashed a grin, already heading toward the exit. "I won't be alone. I have the ship on my side, don't I?" Serafina stared at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. John sprinted out of the bridge, his heart pounding. The real fight was about to begin. The boarders arrive. John raced through the dim corridors of the warship, his pulse hammering. He could already hear the sound of metal tearing apart as the enemy boarding craft latched onto the ship's outer hull. Then, boom, the first airlock breach. John skidded to a stop, raising his weapon. A hiss filled the corridor as the boarding craft tore through the airlock doors. Sparks flew. The metal groaned. Then they came. Tall, armored Imperial sentinels stepped through the breach, their glowing red visors scanning the darkness. They were armed with pulse rifles, energy blades, and riot shields, the Emperor's finest. John inhaled sharply. No time for hesitation. He fired first. The first shot hit the lead sentinel's visor, cracking it. The second shot ripped through its throat, sending it crashing to the floor. The others charged. John barely had time to react before a pulse grenade landed near his feet. Shit. Boom. John was blown backward, slamming into a bulkhead. His ears rang. His vision blurred. He barely had time to recover before a sentinel raised its energy blade, bringing it down. John rolled aside at the last second. The blade sliced into the metal floor, sparks flying. John kicked upward, slamming his boot into the sentinel's jaw, then followed with a point-blank shot to the chest. The sentinel dropped. John spun, dodging another attacker. But there were too many. The sentinels pressed forward, boxing him in. Then, the walls came alive. The warship's internal defense systems roared to life. Hidden turrets descended from the ceiling, opening fire. Plasma beams tore through the sentinels, cutting them down in seconds. John grinned. "Yeah, that's right," he muttered, pushing himself up. "This ship belongs to us now." The final jump. Back on the bridge, Serafina's hands flew over the controls. The Emperor's fleet had closed in. The ship was barely holding together, but the hyperspace drive was finally ready. Jump sequence initialized. Serafina exhaled. "John, we're leaving." John, still catching his breath, heard her over the comms. "I'm on my way." With one final sprint, he raced toward the bridge just as the ship's hyperdrive activated. A deep, rumbling energy spread through the warship. The viewport flared with blinding light. And in the blink of an eye, the Obsidian Wrath vanished into hyperspace. The war has just begun. The Emperor stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching as the Obsidian Wrath escaped. His red eyes burned. For the first time in centuries, someone had defied him. For the first time, he felt something close to fear. Then, slowly, his lips curled into a smile. "Run all you like, John Carter. You cannot stop what is coming."